so much for being here. It is such an honor and privilege to introduce your time to our show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Peter has been on a spiritual path for much of his life. Early explorations of chemistry and astrology quickly evolved into studies of alchemy and the afterlife, and over the years, he's gained much insight into humanity's innate ability to transform itself, as well as illusory veil that separates us from other dimensions. Peter was an educator for 30 years and a high school principal for 13 years, during which time the Indigo Children provided him with first-hand accounts of their spiritual experiences, as well as the limitations they were facing with the traditional school system. Peter was inspired by these exceptional young people and left his career in formal education and turned his attention to walking his true spiritual path while helping others walk theirs. He now counsels individuals and groups with spiritual emergence, overcoming obstacles, and finding one's true life purpose. And we are going to be talking today about the gene keys and activating your highest genius. It is such an honor and pleasure to welcome you to the show. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you both.
Yes, this is such a treat. I have to say, all day long, I have been acting like a little child running around in joy because Peter knows this, and probably every single client that I work with to some degree knows that I just really, I mean, you're just such, there aren't words to describe your presence here and all that you do in way of service, and, you know, what you bring forth to assist people in igniting, you know, their blueprint here, their genius, their greater awareness of who they are and why they're here. And it's just, you know, just honor and a pleasure to have you. And we can't wait to dive in deeper here.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's do that.
Yeah. So one question we're so curious to learn about is, you know, you are doing this incredible work with the exploration and deepening around gene keys. And we'd love to know about your personal gene keys, if there's anything in your profile that really, you know.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. This is really interesting. That's a really interesting question, actually, that you should ask that. I should just mention, because your listeners may not know, but there's a brand new transmission in the gene keys called the Dream Arc. And the Dream Arc is where there is a creature associated with the shadow, gift, and city of all the gene keys. So 64 times 392 creatures. And there is a point to the story. So just bear with me. Last Sunday, we had a gathering of the people that I work most closely with. And one of our wonderful group said it was important for us to work with bee medicine, which is the whole concept of the mind hive and the way in which the bee operates around the queen. And when you look into the Dream Arc, you find that all these creatures are associated with a gene key. And the bee is the insect associated with the 44th gene key, which is my life's work. And so what he asked us to do was to walk in a figure of 8 around a string on the ground. And when you got to the middle, you were to ask that question: what is my ideal journey for me in my lifetime? And then you were asked, how are you going to nurture that ideal? So I'm now walking my infinity symbol and coming to the center. Well, my ideal is the 44th gene key, the city of which is synarchy. So the majority of my work is transforming the shadow of interference, which is the shadow of the 44th gene key, through teamwork. Here we are working together as a team, into synarchy. And it's a word most people don't understand. It's the opposite of anarchy. So anarchy is when everything's in chaos and disrupted. So synarchy is when you have crystal clear energy flow between you and everyone that you're connected with. Mm-hmm. So my ideal has been for the last 7, 8 years since I've been working with the Gene Keys to have sessions with people, to take a deep dive into the interference patterns running programs in their lives so they can see where they have been trapped in the lower frequency of the shadow and how we can move them through that and out into the gift and ultimately into the siddhi. See, the Gene Key process essentially is to take ourselves out of the shadow and into the gift. And if you're living your life in the gift frequency, then you're in a good, happy state. You can't really take yourself into the siddhi state. The siddhis descend upon you when it's time. What you are doing is preparing yourself for when that happens. And what you mustn't do is try and work out what's just happened. As soon as you go into the mind, it goes away. So talking about embodying the higher aspects of ourself requires us just to allow it to saturate our body with bliss, with wonderful things.
Yay!
So that's my life's work. It's a beautiful life's work. And sadly, a lot of the people that I do work with have been abused at some form or another, a lot of sexual abuse by the system to keep them locked down. And so when people can understand the real motive behind their abuse, then it becomes less of an emotional charge, less personal actually, to see this is part of a much bigger picture. And every single person that breaks through that interference pattern into synarchy creates the new earth. And Richard has said, you know, this is the gene key through which the life on earth will change, because no one can stop us doing this work. The only way we don't do our inner work is yet through fear. If we step through that into love, then synarchy eventually will be the tipping point that will change everything. And that's why we are being hammered so much right now to try and keep us in fear. And it's not working. And more people are waking up, the more a restriction is put in place, more people wake up. So it's going to backfire on those people that are trying to have control over all of us. So that's my one gift of the 44. But the other one that I'll talk about, which is probably my greatest challenge, is the one. Oh, yes, I do have the. Oh, how do you know that, Kayla? You've been doing your research on me, you guys. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, I can see what Kayla's coming out here. That's going to be a lovely discussion. So we'll come back to that. But the other gene key, which is a great challenge for me, is my SQ, which is the 15th gene key. And the 15th gene key is our deepest and most profound connection to Mother Earth. It includes the Schumann resonance, which I know you're aware of, but probably most of the listeners are. But essentially, it is the natural heartbeat of Mother Earth, which was a low hum, below most people's ability to hear. Some people can. But over the last couple of years, it's been peaking up to these much higher frequencies, because Mother Earth is actually making the change with us as we shift into this new age. The shadow of that gene key is dullness. And what that means is that people with that gene key can't stand the mundane nature of life. It's not why we're here. So we tend to either avoid doing those things like the taxis, or we get them done as fast as possible. And that's the dullness. But the 15th gene key shadow of dullness is saying to us, when you go out into nature, it's really important to stay as long as it takes for the miracle to happen. So here am I, and I'm living in this, not now, in my previous home. I lived in this beautiful 5-acre property with a perfect reflecting pond. There was a little dock on the pond with a little Adirondack chair sitting. It was like it was made for me. So now I'm sitting in that chair, I'm looking down in the pond, and I'm seeing all the birds flying in the sky. Beautiful. And I'm in this quiet reflection. And yet, although I know all of this, I still had a pull in my guts to go and do something. And this afternoon, actually, I had a gap before this session, and I went down to the waterfront, and I just sat in a chair and just had nothing to do but be there and watch the birds, watch the seals as there's a fish processing plant, and they feed the seals every so often with the carcasses. And just being there in that space is what I need to do. But I still have to ridiculously work at being in no time. So that's my deepest challenge, my 15. And as you know, as children, we were all overtrained, overcommitted to doing stuff. And then we get this belief that if you're not doing something of value, then you're not worthy. And so that's what we've got to transcend and get beyond in the 15th gene key. So now let's get into the oracles Michaela wanted us to talk about. So my core wound is the 31, and she has got the 62, and the 31 and the 62 are the two gene key oracles. This is the ability to speak through words or through light language. So the 31 is the person that has the ability to explain concepts that most people find difficult. That's my core wound. The shadow is arrogance. So again, I have to be really, really careful that I'm not doing anything for my own benefit. It's always for the greater good or for the good of the person. And again, it took me some time to really see through that arrogance, because it can be, when you get down into the deepest layers of the shadow, it can be quite subtle. So I'll give you a couple of examples to show you. I'll be really, really honest and brutally honest with you here. So a really gifted psychic person would have a psychic vision and would really struggle to put that into words. They can't put the vision to words. So they'll spend time sitting with me explaining their experience, and then I can explain their experience better in words than they can. I've got to make sure that I don't take that as my experience, and I must give them all the credit. If I do that, then it's okay for me to help explain. The other one is a bit different, but it's another good arrogance. Some of the work I do is clearing negative entities in homes. And I've got my blue shirt on, my Archangel Michael shirt. So on occasion, I would just walk in to do the clearing and not do any form of setting the boundaries or the protection with Archangel Michael. And that was my arrogance, believing that I could just go and do it. And so you can get kicked in the back for doing that, right? So those are my two examples of the shadow of arrogance. But then the humility, if you can then step into this place of humility, then you can download information from source. Richard Rudd would say that the whole gene key transmission came through him from what he would call the causal plane, which is the first subtle body beyond our physical incarnation. And Richard, as you know, has got a beautiful way with words. And this was a 3-day experience where he was in his study, didn't come out, didn't sleep, didn't eat. And it took 3 days for this information to come through him. And it took him 7 years to put those 3 days into some form that we could work with, which is the gene keys. But Richard, being this classic Englishman with this wonderful way of speaking, and he says, having had that experience, he kept his foot in the door of the causal plane, and he can still take sips from the straw of the causal plane. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, that is
amazing. I'm sure
So
anybody that's listening that does have those two oracle gene keys, yeah, I have one too. And I was wondering, does it matter where in your chart it's appearing, and then also the line that it's associated with?
was that a question to me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Does it matter where in your chart that those are appearing?
Oh, well, it does make a difference, but because they are the two oracles, it will have a different way of impacting the way you deliver it. So let me come and talk about the 62 for a minute then. So the 62 is the oracle without any words. So this is light language. This is making sounds without any words. The 62 shadow is intellect. So the 62nd gene key person is the one who wants to understand everything. Well, you can't understand light language. There's nothing to understand. What it is a sound frequency which is connected to light and geometry. And I know some people that when they hear light language, they see geometrical structures moving through the air. And some people who do automatic writing write symbols rather than words. So these two are the two balances off of the oracle, the spoken word and the sound frequency. And that sound frequency is becoming more and more significant. And this is why so many people are turning to sound healing, because it's a code which has got nothing to understand, but it triggers awakening in our DNA.
Mhm.
So those are the two oracles. I don't know if Kayla wants to chip in with any comment there, because she's got the 62. And you've got it as, and do you have it as well, Brooklyn?
I believe I have the same one as you, but for some reason I'm now questioning because, you know, light language does freely kind of flow through. So is it possible that if you have one, but yet it's the other one is not listed in your chart, you can activate the other?
That's right. Very good. Very good. Because they are connected. They're actually called the ring of no return. Once you step into this, there's no coming back. And it comes through the larynx. So your voice can either be a hurting voice or a healing voice. And so that's the expression that comes through the throat. So yes, if you've got the one, then you've also got the other in that sense, because they activate each other through that link, the same codon ring.
So interesting. I love it.
So we just had a post from someone who, it's gone there, but she said she had the 31 in her attraction sphere. So now I'm going to give her a little caution as a shadow. What I found with people with the 31 in the attraction sphere, it's impossible to argue with them. They will always out-argue you. And so it doesn't work because they have this need to convince you that they're right. But because you're so good with words, there's nothing they can do to win an argument. And it causes all sorts of problems. And that's when the arrogance comes in, because they can always outspeak you. They can always outthink you through the words, and it doesn't work. So we really have to be very careful when we're in one-on-one, particularly with our romantic partners, that we're never justifying our reason to be right. There you go. Say no more, April. Exactly.
Peter, for those who are joining us that maybe aren't as familiar with the infrastructure, so to speak, of the gene keys, can you explain a little bit about the difference between the gift, living the gift state and living the city?
Yeah, so within the profile, we're talking about your birth moment, and the profile has 11 spheres, and those 11 spheres have 3 different qualities according to which gene keys were activated when you were born. So the lower frequency is called the shadow, and that is the frequency that keeps us locked down in repetitive conditioned programs. And then when you break out of the shadow low frequency, you step up into the gift frequency, and now you are living your life on this nice even keel. Some people would call it equanimity, and that's when you stop being triggered by things happening in your life. Now, we all get triggered occasionally, but what happens is everything sort of smooths out as you move into the gift frequency. And so that's where we're sort of living our day-to-day life, hopefully. And then the city frequency is beyond belief. It's this energy that comes in and takes you into this new earth, this new energy, this bliss, this ecstasy, this peace. So all the gene key cities are these higher frequency energies. And it will lead ultimately to us coming into this interconnectedness and oneness. You use the word unity, which is the second gene key, and it is the most feminine gene key of all. So the second gene key is the gene key that's going to bring us into unifying consciousness, which is what this is leading to. But what we are finding now, and I'm sure you guys have it, is more and more synchronicity and more telepathic hits.
Mm.
And I've had a number of occasions now where I'm saying something and the person next to me was about to say the same thing or had just said the same thing. And we just look at each other, and we've come into that connection.
Yeah.
But, telepathy doesn't come through the brain, it comes through the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So we feel it in our awareness, but it actually comes from the heart, not from the brain.
I love that you pointed that out because in recent years, my telepathy has reached new expressions, we'll just say. And it's so funny because my children tried to test it out on me. I'm like, what am I thinking right now? What am I thinking? I said, it doesn't work that way.
That's right.
It doesn't work that way. It's not about that, right? You can't command it, and it's not coming from, the concentrated frontal lobe. It's like,
Exactly.
so I love that you brought that in. And I love that you brought in about the synchronicities ramping up and the telepathy ramping up, because literally in the last few days, it's been remarkable. And not just of my own experience, but in the sharing of, experiences with others, they're saying the same thing. So what do you primarily attribute that to?
Well, I can tell you a very simple, straightforward answer. That was on July the 14th, for the first time ever, a crop circle changed in one day. So it was a completely beautiful, elegant crop circle. And then a couple of days later, it was a totally different formation. That is telling us this is the shift of the ages. The frequency is changing. So as the frequency changes, so we become more interconnected. And so all those wonderful gifts we've been aspiring to just become much more routine and natural. So long as, as you correctly said, we're not trying. It's got to come in a completely spontaneous, relaxed way.
Yeah. Peter, you mentioned the 44th gene key, and I'd love to know what other gene keys are sort of being activated right now.
Can you go back to the mic? Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the 44th gene key, and I'd love to know what other gene keys are being activated right now.
Okay. Well, this very moment, it's great that we're doing this because we're in the 56th gene key. So the sun moves around all 64 gene keys once every year. So it illuminates each gene key for 5 and a bit days. So right now we are in the 56th gene key, the shadow of which is distraction. And it's got mainly to do with the senses, particularly the eyes. So people with the 56th gene key have to be very careful about being distracted away from what really matters by looking at things or experiencing, Netflix or video games, anything that stimulates the eyes. The gift is enrichment. So what the person needs to do is to shift their attention away from the distraction and now make their true spiritual calling their focus. And that's the enrichment. But the great news is the siddhi is intoxication. And when you become intoxicated, you become the divine drunk. And everybody I know that has the 56th siddhi has a phenomenal laugh. It's an infectious laugh. And when I was back on that gathering on Sunday, there are 2 women there whose birthdays are one day apart. They both have the 56, and they were in a totally different room, and they started. And when they go, there's just incredible cacophony of laughter. It's wonderful. And that's the 56. And the whole story of the 56 is you end up just laughing about everything. It's a great cosmic joke. And it does include Cupid's arrows. It is the toxin that penetrates your heart in the pain of love. And then it transmutes into this magnificence of this wonderful gift of love, which is the intoxication. So that's one gene key. The other gene key that I actually would like to mention, I'm actually going back to the total lunar eclipse on May 15th, because that total lunar eclipse was really, really important. It was in a T-square astrologically. So we got the moon in Scorpio, the sun in Taurus, and at right angles, Saturn in Aquarius. Well, Saturn operates in 7-year cycles. So 7 years ago, Saturn was exactly where that total lunar eclipse was in Scorpio. So what we were being asked to do is to look back over these 7 years to see what program has been essentially running our lives for this 7-year period. And I met Richard Rudd in 2014, right? So I knew exactly what it was for me. So then Saturn in Aquarius is saying, are you satisfied with what you've been doing? Is it time to make a change, or is it time to make a refinement? Let's look over our shoulder and review. Because then in 7 years' time, 2029, Saturn will have moved to where the sun was in Taurus. So this is the new Earth energy building in Taurus. Very simple, straightforward building blocks, having looked back to the past and looking forward to the future. Well, the two gene keys involved were the 14th gene key in the moon and the 8th gene key in the sun. And the 14th gene key is a wonderful gene key because the 8th gene key is all about conformity and mediocrity. So again, most of us as children were expected to conform to a certain way of being, which wasn't who we truly are. And that shadow leads to the shadow of the 14th gene key, which is compromise, which is the loss of the dream. So now then, on that total lunar eclipse, we're being asked to say, right, this is it. Smash that box of conformity open, step into your true uniqueness, and then you step into this wonderful competence of the 14th gene key. And Richard talks about 4 qualities: being efficient, being creative, being flexible, and being enthusiastic. When you put those 4 together, it creates the bounteousness of the 14th gene key, which is also called the Midas touch. Everything you touch turns to gold. And the reason I wanted to raise this is we are now stepping into that gold frequency. So this is about us really opening ourselves up inside to the gold frequency and then emanating it out in the world. And just a funny little anecdotal story. I was talking to a woman who had the 14th gene key a while ago, and she said, well, that's really interesting. I was in a store recently, and everything I touched, someone else bought. That's the Midas touch. It's real. So that 14th gene key is playing this role as we shift from that total lunar eclipse. And the reason it's important is it's a 6-month period to the next series of eclipses, which some people think is going to be really, really significant in the shift of the ages. And that's going to be a partial solar eclipse on October the 25th and a total lunar eclipse, another total lunar eclipse on November the 8th. So we've got this 6-month period, I believe, since that total lunar eclipse to really get all of this sorted out on the inside.
Feels very powerful, and what a beautiful invitation to let go of, playing these roles of inauthenticity. It's always so wonderful when we can have an additional invitation drop in to let go of conforming to these old systems and really branch into our truest blueprint in nature. What are you anticipating, some practical steps to engage in this? Like how, you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of times people get excited in the energy of it, but then they're like, like, how do I, actually apply this? Like, what would be, some things that you're seeing show up that are great examples of how one can really step into that?
It's not really practical. It's about going within. So there's so much fear being generated on the planet right now on all levels, on every single level. And so what we've got to do is become the neutral witness of that and hold to the highest frequency that we can on the inside and not allow ourselves to be pulled down by anything. And it requires a deep and profound trust that we are ourselves competent beings and that the universe is on our side, and that there are some dark forces trying to control the planet. There's no point fighting those dark forces. What we do want to do is to raise the frequency as much as we possibly can into this new earth that is upon us. And the thing that people really need to know is it's got nothing to do with money or politics or corporate world or anything. It's only Mother Earth that's going to make the decision. So the more closely connected we are with her, the easier this will be. Now, people all over the world are taking practical steps to do with water and food and money. But what exactly we should be doing is unknown, because we just don't know how severe this is going to become. So it's a good idea to remain diversified in your money if you have some. It's a good idea to have some food stockpiled, but not like obsessively, and just being really sensible about it, but not allowing yourself to drop down into fear, because that's the overall plan, is to keep us locked down in those shadow frequencies. And then the other thing I really emphasize with everybody is to be fully grounded in the body. And I'm not talking about earthing or Mother Earth here. I'm talking about in the physical body. Very few people have spent any time down in their root chakra. It's a bit of a scary place for some, particularly if you don't have a line 1 in your profile. The thought of going right down deep in your body is a bit scary. And that's the place to go. It's actually the 46th gene key, which is what level of safety did you feel as a child in the first 7 years of life, or didn't feel? And it keeps you up and out of your body, and you often leave your body if you're in that stressful state. Mm-hmm. So this is when you feel scattered or running around like a headless chicken, or just being absent. So having the guts to go all the way down the body, and I'm talking about in the base of the body, so in the perineum, right between the legs, and just sitting there and feeling into what it feels like. And most people want to get out of there as fast as possible. It's uncomfortable. There's an agitation energy. But the great cosmic joke, or the great paradox, is that when you feel safe down in the base root chakra, you create a vortex of safety around you. And that is the 46 gene key. And I have that gene key. And so now I walk through the world with this absolute total belief that I'm safe. No concern about anything whatsoever, because that's the inner work that I've done. And so I just believe that the universe is on my side, and I can just be me without any fear of anything. Because ultimately, what is that fear? The fear is either of dying or of being badly hurt. Right? Well, we don't die anyway. We just shift into a different dimension. So that doesn't matter. So, it's really taking us to the deepest level of our conditioned programming around our lives, and throwing off all the things we've been led to believe, and trusting our own inner knowing deeply.
Amazing.
I love that. I love that you bring that up, because I feel as though when we feel really safe in our physical body, that's when, fear really, truly dissipates.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is...
Before we move on, I just want to answer the question in the chat, because it was spiritual torture. Whenever you have a fear like that, it's a past life issue, that you were tortured in a previous life for being spiritual. So it's important, and it's a really great question. So many gifted spiritual people have that fear, that if I stepped into my true spiritual calling today, something horrible will happen to me, and it's not going to. So it's really important to work through that fear, to realize it happened in a past life, and that was a past life, and it's no longer true. So we can let it go.
Yeah, that's so.
Sorry. Oh, hang on a minute. She's coming back. My spiritual body part. I don't understand that. My spiritual body part's being used. Can you expand on that point? Do you guys know what she means?
Oh, let's see. I feel like perhaps she's articulating it now as we're chatting about this, but perhaps what she's saying is that she feels a sense of, constant influx of entities interfacing her spirit body and her light body, and feeling a strong sense of vulnerability
right.
in that.
So this is what guarantees that can't happen. When you fill yourself up from the root up and out, those entities can't get in. The only reason entities can get in is because you're porous. You've got holes in your aura. So when you get right down into your base of your body and you bring in that energy up from the base of the body, all in filling your whole system, nothing can penetrate that. That's what the gold frequency I was talking about earlier. And then there was another question about going down into the roots, about going into your inner child. Not necessarily. Going down into the root is just going down into the root. There's nothing to be done except being comfortable being there. The inner child work is done in a different way. So it's getting too complex, because that root work is just going down into the root and feeling how safe do I feel being here in my body. That's all you have to do. And then over a period of time, you'll feel more and more safe. The best way to do inner child work, 35th gene key. 35th gene key are people that have a relatively low level of serotonin in their system. Very hard to feel satisfied with anything in life. And it often includes eating disorders as well. And the only way to resolve it is to go on an inner journey, now not going to the root, but now going into the womb space from where you were born from your mother. And this is what I encourage people to do who want to do inner child work. You go into that womb space inside your own body, and you create this absolutely beautiful garden, the most beautiful garden you can imagine inside you. And then you invite your inner child to come and join you in that garden. And then you can play and have fun and get to know each other again.
I love that. Yeah, I was just in my garden. It was awesome.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you had a question.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about is about the activation sequence and how through that process we can help discover and deepen our life's purpose.
Okay, so there are 3 sequences in the gene keys: the activation sequence, the Venus sequence, and the Pearl sequence. So the journey begins in the activation sequence with the life's work at the top and the evolution on the right-hand side. Those 2 keys are the way in which you are here to operate out in the world. It's what you show the world who you are. And that's where the journey starts. The first blocking point is in the evolution. So when you look at your gene key evolution shadow, that is the first place where you can be kept locked down and stopping you from making the progress in your life. Then the radiance and purpose are the inner you. This is the unconscious. So they're harder to access. So now you have to go deeper in to connect with those shadows. And the radiance is the environment in which you thrive. And I should probably just mention then the line number. So the number after the decimal point really corresponds to the chakra system. So line 1 is the root, 2 is the sacral, 3 is the solar plexus, 4 the heart, 5 the throat, 6 both chakras in the head. So looking at the line number of your radiance tells you how you best thrive in your environment. So for example, line 1 people need isolation, solitude, time alone to work things out. Line 3 people need to be interacting with other people to learn best about themselves. So from that line number, you know a bit of a sense of where your environment helps you to thrive. Then at the very bottom, the purpose is your soul's purpose. So this is what your soul wanted you to experience in this lifetime. So now if you could see your profile, the soul's purpose at the very bottom is the inner you and what your soul wants you to experience in this lifetime. And the life's work at the very top is how you go about it in the world. So now you can see the backbone of the 5 spheres right up the center of the profile. From the base to the top, you want to bring them into perfect alignment. And you bring them into perfect alignment by looking into your primary relationships in the attraction sphere, the SQ in the first few years of your life, and then the Pearl, which is your final contentment in life. So you bring those 5 into perfect alignment with each other. So your soul's purpose, the inner you and the outer you in the world are operating in harmony. That was the activation sequence.
Powerful. Yeah. I love how there's so many layers to it. I feel like,
Oh, yes.
I've had two profound sessions with you and think about, those sessions all the time. And, and just the other day, as I was getting excited about our time here together, I was like, I feel like, I want to go back and have I feel like we could have a session every week for the rest of our lives together, and there'd still be tons of things to explore. I mean, it's just so, there's just so many layers to it. It's profound. And I feel like a lot of people maybe stop at the free gene key report, and they feel like, oh, that's it. But I mean, there's so many ways to apply it. So could you share a little bit with everybody as to like the other ways that one can apply, the system of gene keys, right? Because there's the obvious one of like your own gene key report, right? That which kind of this picture that you're talking about that has all these different sort of systems and lines to it. But how else can you participate in the gene keys? Like, and how else do you assist others in participating
Right.
and, applying the gene keys?
Right. So I just wanted to come back to Bridget's comment, because she made about her inner child. She said she's done that inner garden work, and her clairvoyance and intuition have really excelled. So what she's doing there is she's coming into alignment with her inner child, where you set yourself free from the conditioning so you can have that greater intuitive understanding, which is fantastic. So to answer your question, it's a bit of a complicated question, but so let me first of all come back to the individual person and working with the gene keys, because we've talked about the activation sequence, and then we haven't yet talked about the Venus sequence. So we need to do that first so people get an understanding of that piece. So when you go through the Venus sequence, first of all, you look at your attraction sphere to see how your one-on-one relationships with people play out in your life. So these are all the people you pull into your life to show you things you need to see. Some of them are beautiful and loving and kind and trusting, and others are a challenge. And so we look into those to feel what is it in that relationship that bothers me, that disturbs me, that triggers me. And then we go back through our childhood. The IQ is our mental development. That's the age 15 to 21. The EQ is our emotional development, 8 to 14. And the SQ is our physical development coming into form in the first 7 years of life. So the way in which you go about this in the gene key profile, typically by reading Richard's book, which if you're going to take it seriously is essential. It's beautifully written, poetic information. And it takes us right to the upper edge of our ability to follow. It's really well done. So then when you read a chapter in the book, which is one of your gene keys, you're getting that mental understanding of what that gene key represents. And now you've brought it up into the field. So now you're experiencing triggers based around that gene key shadow. So now you look into whenever you get triggered or whenever you have an emotional reaction, and you now go into a quiet contemplation, you go within and you think, okay, can I name the way that made me feel? What was the emotion that came up? When have I experienced in a previous situation that same sort of feeling? So then you work through the emotional body. And when you've done that and you've cleared that, then there's an actual physical change in your DNA, and you'll never repeat that pattern again. So it goes from mental to emotional to physical. And that's the way you work through the Venus sequence, going through the central part of the Venus sequence. But then there's one further very deep wound that we have to consider, and that's our ancestral wounding, which is the core wound. This is the moment of your conception when your parents conceived you and imprinted into your DNA the sacred wound of the ancestors. And we made this crazy decision in this lifetime that when we became consciously aware of that fact, that we would clear that wound on their behalf for them. It's the greatest gift you can offer them. And you do it simply by clearing it yourself in terms of your own gene key and your own line. And then you know exactly what it is. Some people know their family history, some people don't. It doesn't matter. because you will know inside you what you need to do through that gene key and that line. So that brings you to the end of the Venus sequence. So that's the deep work that we do. Then the final sequence is the Pearl sequence. And this is now how you come back out into the world, having done all this inner work, and how you're now going to offer yourself in service in the world. So that wound now becomes your greatest gift. And you now bring that out. And then you come into your culture, which is the way in which you're going to do it, and with the groups of people you're going to do it with. Then you go back to the very top, back to the life's work, but it's now called your brand, because you're now in a higher expression of who you really are. And this is now how you image yourself into the world. Now you've done all this inner work. Then the final step is the pearl. It's the final contentment. It's the harvest of all the work that you've done in your life to bring you to this place of contentment and peace and happiness in your life. And so this whole journey takes you around that. And you can do it simply on your own by working with the book and with your profile, or having a session with me. Or there are workshops that you can do in different parts of the world with different people. You can do workshops online. In fact, I'm going to be doing a workshop in Nova Scotia, which is called the 7 Sacred Seals, which is the more mystical element of the gene keys. And that focuses on the 6 core wounds of all of humanity. So there are only 6, but we all fall into those 6 wounds. And so in the 7 Sacred Seals, you work your way through those 6 lines, starting on the 6th line down to the 1st line, as a group of people in the workshop. So what you're working to do is to surrogate on behalf of all those humanity's wounds, to clear them out in the best way that we can. So that's the more mystical end of the gene keys. And that's a 3-day workshop, which is pretty intense.
I'm curious, in a workshop such as that, you know, of that work, right, of that collective work, does each person, based on their gene key, you know, outline, have specific roles in how they can participate, you know, in you know, the efficacy of that happening?
That's a great question, and it depends upon the number of people involved. So when Richard first did the 7 Sacred Seals, there were about 120 people there. So only people with that line engaged in that particular activity. So the way it works is Richard does an invocation, a sort of a setting a meditative energy for that particular seal, which is the same as the line number. Then you do a discussion of all the elements of that line and all the wounding that takes place. And then you have a visceral experience of it. And so everybody joins in the invocation and the discussion, but only those people who have that line have the experience of that situation. And everybody else is holding space for and witnessing. When we do it, we only have usually 20 people or so. So we get everybody to do every line. So everybody gets to experience every line. And it's interesting because as you work down the lines in the wounding, you get down to the 2nd line, and the 2nd line is denial. And there are some people who don't want to go there because it's the line of denial. It's almost the point at which people won't go. And then below that is line 1, which is repression, which is the most scary situation your family have endured. And what I've found with people with line 1, it's got usually something to do with annihilation. So the whole tribe being wiped out. So, for example, I had a session with a woman whose mother was in the Holocaust, and she was set free at the end of the war, and then got immediately pregnant with this woman. So she's in her 70s now. And so the whole frequency running through her lineage was of the whole tribe being wiped out. Or it can be connected back to the Irish or Scandinavian potato famine, the fear of not having enough food to eat, the fear of not having enough money, but one of them is the fear of living a full life. So again, when you get down to that line 1, you're getting down to the real nitty gritty of the deepest possible fear anyone could have. So it's a very, very profound and intense workshop, but it really takes you as deep as you can go in your own world, in your own work.
Wow.
There's so much to it to explore. I'm so excited about really going in depth and learning and discovering. I mean, there's so many gifts in this area of study and exploration. And, I know, Peter, your mom was an astrologer.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you. I know that there is some overlap with astrology. How would you compare the different modalities, and what do you love about gene keys versus astrology?
It's a great question. My mum saved my life because I was a chemistry major. So if you couldn't see it and you couldn't measure it, it didn't exist. And she eventually pulled her trump card and she said to me, if you consider yourself a scientist, prove me wrong. And to be fair to me, I studied it. And of course I couldn't, because there was truth in it. But that wasn't my calling. But then it went into a whole bunch of other areas, including near-death experience and what happens when you die, including actually working at the alchemical furnace with the boiling metals and minerals. This was all a preparation for this. And so the gene keys, I feel, fits in this beautiful space between astrological knowledge and spiritual counseling. So when I was just doing spiritual counseling, it would take me at least 6 sessions to get where I understood the issue. Now it's done in 1 hour. And so not only do you tap into really accurate information about the person, but you also give them the way in which they can resolve it through the gifts of their gene keys. So it is based upon that moment of birth. And people have a big misunderstanding about that moment of birth. People get all wrapped up in if the doctor went off to have a coffee and the birth was delayed. What you've got to think of is this. You appeared in this world at a particular moment in time. It doesn't matter what happened before that. In that moment in time, the planets and the stars were in a certain position. So it's like a snapshot in that moment of birth. And all the stars and the planets are there to support you in your life. So the astrology focuses on those planetary alignments. The gene keys takes some of those planetary alignments to put them into this expression of these gene keys to give you this deeper understanding of the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi. So, for example, the life's work in your profile is where the sun was when you were born. So anybody born today would have the 56 gene key as their life's work. And then the rest of the activation sequence is based upon a 6-month, 3-month, 9-month placement. And then when you come into the attraction sphere, it's to do with the moon. The Venus sequence is to do with the position of Mars and Venus. That's why it's called the Venus sequence. It's the energy of the yin and the yang and the masculine and the feminine. And then the Pearl sequence is based around Jupiter, the planet of expansion and good fortune, which is what brings you to the final completion in the Pearl. So it is based upon astrological positioning of the planets, but it focuses more on these qualities. And when people ask Richard some astrological questions, he doesn't know the answers, because this was a transmission that came through to him as a geometrical pattern. So within the geometry is where the planets were in that moment, right? But it's not astrology as such, if that makes any sense at all.
It does. That's so helpful. And I'm curious, I know you've spent time with Richard. What has been the biggest aha and takeaway from that experience?
I think the biggest takeaway is that he's got so much stuff we don't know yet. You know, he's got other sequences that he wants to bring out, just like the dream arc. So there's an expanded pearl sequence called the star pearl that hasn't come out. There's a sequence I know he's been working on, which is a Mercury sequence. There's also a Saturn sequence. But he, unfortunately, gets wrapped up in all the day-to-day admin stuff that has to be done. So it's hard for him to find those opportunities to bring all these new potential systems out. So I think first of all, my greatest time spent with Richard is he's just a delightful man. He's very humble, and he's quite funny. And, you know, both being English, we have that same sort of humor, that same style. So I really enjoy that with him. But I also really, really honor this incredible gift he has to bring this transmission through in this level of humility that he has. And I think probably for me, the most profound element of all of this is the purity of the transmission. It's so crystal clear. And when you read some of the gene keys today, he's actually talking about exactly what's happening today. And he wrote this back in the year 2000. He even talks about a virus. In fact, in the 44th gene key, he talks about a virus wrapped around our DNA as an interference pattern.
Wow.
So there's this element beyond our knowing that he had come through him.
Is there a gene key for the age of Aquarius?
Yes. Did you know the answer to that, or is that a speculative question?
I think I may know.
You're crafty, Emily. Yes, there is. And it's an important one. Richard's asking about the book. Richard's Gene Key book. It's the big book. It's just called the Gene Keys. It's over 500 pages, and it describes in detail the shadow, gift, and city of every gene key. Every chapter is that gene key name. So the gene key of the age of Aquarius is the 55th gene key. It's the only gene key in the book where Richard does any prophesizing about the future. It's really well worth reading that chapter alone, whether you've got it or not, because he's talking about what is coming. And the shadow of that gene key is victimization. So whenever you're playing the victim, you're in the shadow of the 55th. And you know when you are, whenever you're blaming, complaining, or comparing. And we all do it, we're all human. So Richard loves the pause. So you catch yourself in awareness. You pause and you breathe and you step out of the victimhood into taking full responsibility for the discomfort. And that's what sets you free. The gift and city are both freedom, because once you're free, you're free. And the totem that goes with it is the dragonfly. And people are seeing these dragonflies all over the place now. And it does connect with the dragon energy as well as the flying dragons. Now, I should just let you know, just to give you guys real heart, everybody listening, that one of the prophecies that Richard makes on the 55th gene key is sacred union couples coming together in a place of bliss and romance and sexual arousal that you've never experienced before. And I'm happy to tell you, I've had at least 8 sessions where it's already happened. And it's not straightforward. So let me explain. Here you are, and you've done your inner work, and you're on that journey. And then this other person comes along, and it's, wow, this is amazing. It's magical. It's intense. And the reason it's happened is because you were supposed to do work together that you couldn't do on your own. This is twin flame energy. But it's very intense. So if this other person has not done their inner work, they will dissolve away. And then someone else will come in. So it's not about the people, it's about the energy between the two. It's a very dynamic relationship energy. But when it happens and you're available, it's the most amazing experience that you can have. And it's not just based upon romance, it is based upon we've got something to do together here, which is important.
I love that. I'm curious, in astrology, you can look at sort of the synastry of 2 charts. Is it the same in gene keys where you could sort of tell if a couple is going to be compatible or if they're going to have a lot of challenges in relationships?
Yes, and I do quite a few couples profiles. So literally looking at the 2 profiles of the 2 people involved. Again, not like the astrology, it's different. But what I would be able to do is to see where the potential challenges might come and see where the wonderful potential gifts and cities would be. So again, if someone's got the 55 in their attraction sphere, they are almost certain going to have this experience because it's the 55th gene key in the attraction sphere. So I've got another question here. That's a great question, Kayla. Question is, if you don't have that gene key and it's the gene key of the day, what would you do about that? Well, as I said, like we're in the 56 gene key right now. So I go straight to that gene key. And I think, okay, this next 5 or 6 days, there's a really good chance that I'm going to get distracted away from my true calling. But if I really focus in on what really matters, then I have this opportunity to enrich my life, and I can even start laughing about it. So it's helpful to know a little bit about all the keys. But as Kayla said, Richard puts out a little word about each gene key as it comes up. And there are other people in Facebook groups that talk about particular gene keys when they're up in the field. So you can work with every single gene key throughout the course of the year. There is a calendar that Daniel Goleman produces, which gives you every single date in the year and that particular gene key.
I have a question. How, is there any sort of way within the system to determine, if you've experienced all the other gene keys and, and these are the last of the gene keys, or in other words, would there be something in your current gene key expression or, that would suggest you have kind of made your way through all the different gene keys? Or is it one of those things that, it doesn't work like that?
No, it's not sequential. So what you'll find is you'll follow the journey in a sequential way, but then if you haven't cleared a particular shadow, it will just pop up. And what does happen is as you do the work, it gets easier and easier and more subtle, but then you do have to pay attention to those subtle things that come up. And then you begin to see, okay, that's one piece I didn't quite clear. But the whole journey is the intention to reach enlightenment. And Richard would say that you can focus on just one gene key and just spend all of your time on that gene key. It's called the epiphany. And you put all your energy into that gene key and you come to your enlightenment through that one gene key. And the one gene key that I would choose, if I were you, is the 25th gene key. Because within the 25th gene key are all the elements that we need to deal with. So the shadow is constriction. And this is not receiving the love that you needed as a child, whatever was taking place. And it brings into you a tightness between the heart and the throat. That's the constriction. It's a tightness in the upper chest. Whenever you feel that tightness, you know it's because you're not feeling the love that you need. That's the shadow. Then the gift is acceptance. So when you can accept in totality everything that's happened in your life, it's all part of the journey. It's all part of the preparation. It's the setup for your success. So you let go of the emotional charge and you look into each event that's caused you pain and suffering. What was the lesson in that for me? And that self-acceptance grows out of total acceptance. That self-acceptance moves into self-love. And self-love is this wonderful city of universal love. So it goes from constriction to acceptance to universal love. And Richard talks about this universal love, and he uses the word absorption. And what that means is that when you fall in love with yourself, it grows and it grows and it grows and it can't be stopped. And I have had one interaction with a woman who's got that 25th gene key, who's had that experience. And she said, there are no words in our vocabulary to explain that feeling. Every word you use does not do it. And it's not a selfish or self-centered love, because you just start emanating it out into the world.